I always thought moving into a new apartment would be exciting, a fresh start, the kind of thing people talk about when they want to change in their lives. But the moment I stepped into this place, I felt a subtle wrongness that I couldn't shake. The building was old, the kind with creaky floors and long hallways that smelled faintly of mildew and waxed wood. My apartment itself was small, a one-bedroom on the third floor, with tall windows that looked out onto the street. Everything seemed fine, almost too normal, except for the way the shadows seemed to gather in the corners, even during the day. I moved in during the late afternoon, carrying boxes up the narrow staircase and trying not to notice how the walls groaned under my weight. The elevator was broken, they told me, which was fine. I liked the exercise. I unpacked slowly, trying to distract myself with small tasks, but every so often I'd hear a soft scrape from the hallway outside my door. At first, I assumed it was the building settling or another tenant moving in. But it happened often, too often for coincidence. The first night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I froze, listening. They weren't heavy footsteps, more like someone tiptoeing, careful, waiting. I told myself it was my imagination, that living alone makes you hear things you wouldn't normally notice. But when I turned on my bedside lamp and pressed my ear to the door, I could hear breathing. Slow, steady, and oddly rhythmic, almost as if the person was counting. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and by morning, the sound had stopped. A week passed, and the incidents became harder to ignore. I started noticing things in the apartment itself. A box that had been in the middle of the floor would be moved slightly overnight. My keys would vanish from the counter, only to reappear on the windowsill. I even thought I saw a shadow flicker at the edge of my vision as I walked to the bathroom, but when I turned, nothing was there. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe the old building shifted things. Maybe I was just tired. But the unease kept building, like a quiet pressure in my chest. One night, I woke up to a soft tapping on the window. I live on the third floor. There's no tree close enough for branches to reach it, no fire escape. I froze, staring at the dark glass. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate, almost musical. My heart hammered in my chest. I pulled the curtain aside, and there was nothing, just the empty street below, lit by the dim glow of a street lamp. I told myself it was a branch, maybe an animal, anything that would explain the sound, but it didn't feel right. The air in the room was too still, too heavy, like it had been waiting. A few days later, I found a note slipped under my door. Small, roughly torn, with jagged handwriting that looked as though it had been scratched out in a hurry. It said only, "You shouldn't be here." I laughed at first, the nervous kind of laugh that comes when fear is mingled with disbelief. Maybe it was a prank, maybe another tenant with too much time on their hands. But that night, the footsteps came back, louder this time, circling my door for hours. The breathing followed, slow and calculated. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I noticed something I couldn't explain. On my bathroom mirror, faintly etched in the condensation from my shower, were letters forming a single word, leave. I scrubbed the mirror clean, thinking perhaps it was a trick of the steam, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Everywhere I looked, I felt eyes on me. When I cooked dinner, I imagined someone standing just behind me, a shadow lingering closer than it should be. The building, the apartment, it felt alive in a way that wasn't comforting. I tried to confide in the building manager, but he was an old man with deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. When I mentioned the notes and the footsteps, he frowned, muttering something about the history of the place and some tenants just don't last here. I pressed for details, but he shook his head and walked away, leaving me with a gnawing feeling that I wasn't supposed to ask questions. Then it escalated. One night, I woke to the sound of scratching coming from inside the walls themselves. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging against plaster. I checked every inch of the apartment, every door, every corner, but found nothing. I thought I saw movement in the shadows, a figure standing just outside the reach of my lamplight. It didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. I held my breath, frozen, as the scratching continued for what felt like hours. By morning, I was shaking, convinced I was losing my mind. I started sleeping with the lights on, my keys clutched in my hand like a weapon, but even then I could feel it. Something in the apartment had noticed me. It was aware. I could hear faint whispers sometimes, soft, incoherent, just on the edge of hearing. I told myself it was stress, anxiety, exhaustion, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. One evening, as I returned from work, I noticed the front door of my apartment slightly ajar. I never leave it unlocked. My stomach dropped as I crept inside, the hair on my arms standing up. Everything looked normal, at first glance. Nothing was out of place except for a single item on the floor, a small, cracked porcelain doll, its face painted with a smile that seemed far too wide. I didn't own it, I had never seen it before, and yet it was there, staring up at me as if it had been waiting for me to return. I picked it up, trembling, and then I noticed the note tucked under its arm. The same jagged handwriting, "You're next." My hands went cold. My heart raced. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat against it, unable to move. That night, the footsteps were louder than ever, circling the apartment, stomping up the hallway, then retreating just out of reach. The breathing followed, closer now, right behind me, but whenever I turned, there was nothing. Only shadows and silence, waiting. I stayed in the apartment for a few more days, unsure of what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my apartment was haunted. That someone, or something, was inside my walls, leaving dolls and notes and whispering in the night? No one would believe me. I started sleeping in my car, keeping the lights on and the doors locked, just so I could get a few hours of uneasy rest. Then, yesterday, I found a new note. This one wasn't under the door or slipped under the mat. It was on my kitchen table, written in the same jagged hand. It said, simply, "We've been waiting." I don't know who "we" is. I don't want to know. I left the apartment immediately and haven't gone back. I stayed with a friend, packing only the essentials, but every time I close my eyes, I see the shadow in the corner, the figure standing in the doorway, waiting. I can't stay there. I can't live there. The building feels alive in a way that's not human. Something is inside those walls, patient, calculating, and it doesn't want me here. I keep thinking about the old man, the building manager, and the way he refused to explain anything. Maybe he knew. Maybe he's been here all along, or maybe he's just another tenant who didn't last. I live alone in a rural area, the kind of place where the nights are so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat if you stop moving. My house sits at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees on all sides. No neighbors close enough to see lights, no street lamps, no passing traffic after dark. I moved here because I wanted peace. For a while, I had it. The first strange thing was the radio. I don't remember turning it on. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of static drifting through the hallway. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe interference from a distant signal bouncing through the trees. But when I sat up in bed and listened more closely, I realized it was coming from the living room. I don't own a radio. At least, I didn't think I did. I crept down the hallway, every floorboard groaning under my weight. The sound grew louder as I approached the living room. Sitting on the coffee table, glowing softly in the dark, was a small portable radio. Old-fashioned. Silver casing. An antenna bent slightly to the side. The static was thick, uneven, like breathing. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had never bought that radio. I don't collect antiques. I don't even listen to broadcast radio. My phone does everything I need. I reached out and turned the dial. The static stopped. Relief washed over me so quickly it almost made me dizzy. I unplugged the radio and stood there, waiting. Nothing happened. The house was silent again. I told myself I must have forgotten it. Maybe it belonged to the previous owner. Maybe I had unpacked it without remembering. Stress does weird things to memory. I went back to bed. The next night, the radio turned on again. Same time, 3 a.m. This time, when I walked into the living room, the static faded as I approached, resolving into something else. A voice. Quiet. Warped. Like it was being stretched through water. Still there. I froze. The voice repeated itself, looping unevenly. Still there. Still there. My chest tightened. I unplugged the radio again, hands shaking, and shoved it into a kitchen drawer. I didn't sleep after that. The following morning, the drawer was empty. The radio sat back on the coffee table. I started paying attention after that. Listening. Watching. The house felt different at night, like it was holding on to something it didn't want to let go of. The darkness in the corners seemed thicker. The silence felt intentional. Each night, the radio turned on at 3 a.m. The static gradually gave way to voices. Sometimes it sounded like one person, sometimes several. Always distorted. Always just barely understandable. Can you hear us? Don't move. Stay awake. I tried throwing the radio away. I drove it to a gas station trash can miles down the road and left it there. That night, I woke up to static again. It was back on the table. I tried smashing it. The casing cracked. The antenna snapped. The dial broke off in my hand. That night, the radio turned on anyway. The voices were clearer after that. You're doing it right. We see you. I stopped sleeping entirely. I drank coffee constantly, afraid of what might happen if I slept through the broadcast. I started leaving lights on in every room, but it didn't help. The radio didn't care about light. One night, instead of voices, I heard breathing. Slow. Measured. In time with my own. I unplugged the radio and screamed at it, demanding it stop. The breathing continued, even without power. Then it spoke. Don't pretend you're alone. The voice sounded like mine. I staggered backward, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The radio crackled, adjusting itself. You listen so well, it said. That's why you were chosen. Chosen for what? I whispered. The radio clicked softly. To remember us. The lights flickered. Every single one in the house went out at once. In the darkness, the radio glowed faintly, its cracked casing pulsing like something alive. Voices poured out of it then. Dozens. Overlapping. Whispering my name. Saying things only I should know. Memories I had buried. Thoughts I had never spoken aloud. I ran. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't grab my keys. I ran barefoot into the trees, branches tearing at my skin, the radio's voices echoing in my head long after the sound itself stopped. I stayed with a friend in another town. I didn't tell them everything. I couldn't. I barely slept. A week later, I went back in the daylight to get my things. The house was quiet. Empty. Normal. The radio sat on the coffee table. Unplugged. Silent. I left it there. I don't live alone anymore. I moved into an apartment in the city. There's always noise. Traffic. Neighbors. Sirens. I sleep better when I'm not surrounded by silence. But sometimes, late at night, when everything finally calms down, I hear it. A faint crackle. A whisper beneath the hum of electricity. Still there. And I know it followed me. I didn't know fear until I realized someone I loved could also be someone who wanted to destroy me. Until that moment, I had always trusted my life would follow a predictable path. Work, small routines, friendships, love, chaotic, yes, but navigable. I never imagined that the person closest to me could turn into the architect of my worst nightmares. I'm 24. I'd just finished my education when I met her. Janice. She was 29, confident in a way that drew people in, soothing in a way that made chaos feel manageable. I fell in love quickly, the way you do with someone who seems to understand the cracks in your life before you even recognize them yourself. I was insecure, often anxious, and she had a calm that made me feel safe. Safe enough to dream, to try, to keep picking myself up no matter how many jobs fell apart around me. I worked a lot of jobs. Cafes, bookstores, libraries, tutoring, grocery stores. Sometimes I held two at once. I did it to gain experience, to grow, to prove to myself that I was capable. Jobs were short, transient, sometimes ending abruptly without explanation. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. I chalked it up to circumstances beyond my control. But the pattern was too precise, too deliberate to ignore forever. The first hints were subtle. A customer complaint that didn't match reality. An anonymous review describing me in ways that weren't true. Occasionally, My former co-workers would call managers with fabricated stories. At the time, I didn't suspect her. I told myself it was just coincidence, or maybe some strange streak of misfortune. She comforted me, supported me, and I clung to that as proof that life had balance. Even when doors slammed in my face, she reminded me there was a path forward. It all changed one ordinary week when I had been working part-time at a bakery for a little over 2 months. I liked the job. It was quiet, steady. My manager treated me well, and the customers were pleasant. I thought things were finally settling, and then a review appeared. At first, I didn't panic. I'd seen them before, but as I read the words, my chest tightened. Someone had written a detailed complaint about a worker matching my description. The day described was one I had worked alone. Every critique, every insult, every negative observation fit me perfectly. My stomach dropped. For a second, the room seemed to tilt, like gravity had betrayed me. I explained to my manager calmly, recounting past instances. She believed me, thankfully, and promised to handle it. Relief washed over me, brief and fragile. I didn't tell Janice. Not yet. I needed a moment to breathe, to process. I thought perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe I was imagining a pattern where none existed. Maybe my anxiety was just flaring. But deep down, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. 2 days later, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed clarity, confirmation. I asked to use her booking account to make a train ticket to see my dad. She handed it over without hesitation. While she showered, I opened her email. I told myself it was normal. I had used accounts before, but my instincts were screaming. Something was off. I found an email she had sent to herself. It contained a spreadsheet. I froze. Opening it felt like stepping into a trap I didn't even know existed. The spreadsheet was meticulous. Each of my jobs was listed. Work schedules, passwords, emails, notes on managers and co-workers. Instructions, strategies, timelines. Everything one could need to sabotage a person's life efficiently. It wasn't messy or impulsive. It was calculated, purposeful. My body went cold. I felt hunted. I couldn't comprehend the scope of what I was seeing. Every job I'd held, every opportunity I'd tried to build, every chance to stabilize myself, all documented and prepared to be destroyed. My hands shook as I scrolled. I took screenshots, I printed pages, I archived evidence. Not because I trusted the law to save me, but because I had to feel control somewhere. When she left for work, I packed. I didn't leave anything that mattered behind. Every document, every personal item that could be used against me, I secured. I told my boss I needed time off. I didn't explain. I couldn't. I drove to my father's house, shaking, crying, terrified of a presence that hadn't physically touched me but had invaded every corner of my life. My father stayed calm, patient, and immediately began organizing the chaos I couldn't even begin to manage. Lawyers, police, therapy, things I never thought I'd need at 24 became essential overnight. My apartment, my accounts, my life, all locked down. I felt the weight of betrayal as a physical force pressing down on my chest. Janice tried to contact me. I didn't answer. Not once. I sent a single message telling her it was over. I didn't want her near me. The truth was brutal. Someone I loved, someone I trusted, had systematically prepared to ruin my life. We didn't take her to court. People might call that leniency, but it was survival. The thought of facing her, answering questions, reliving the betrayal, I couldn't endure it. My lawyers settled things quietly, privately, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Years have passed. I have a stable job. I live in a new home. I've rebuilt routines, relationships, my own sense of safety. I haven't had a single panic attack in months. I keep my digital presence minimal, private, and guarded. I don't know what she's doing. I don't want to know. The lesson is stark, indelible. Trust is fragile. Love can be terrifying. And the person you think will hold you together can sometimes be the one to unravel everything. But surviving it, reclaiming my life, has taught me something stronger than fear. I am resilient. I am cautious now, yes, but I am not broken. And no spreadsheet, no plan, no betrayal can take that from me. Even when the world feels like it is crumbling, there is a way forward. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's painstaking. But every day I wake up, I remind myself, survival is proof of strength. And that strength is mine alone. I had always dreamed of having a home that felt entirely mine. Not just a space to live, but a place where I could express myself freely, creatively, without rules or judgments. When I finally bought my house, a modest place in a quiet neighborhood, I knew I had found that freedom. There was no homeowners association, no committee dictating what shades we could use or how our gardens should look. It was liberating, the kind of autonomy that made every morning feel like a blank canvas. I had a vision in mind. Soft, playful, and welcoming. I wanted my house to feel like it invited people in, like it reflected joy in the same way a warm smile can. I chose a soft peach color for the walls, with accents of sage blue and muted pink to highlight architectural details. Every choice felt intentional. Every color and shade carefully considered to reflect light, warmth, and personality. My yard was an extension of that vision, wildflowers swaying freely, sunflowers towering proudly, garden flags fluttering in gentle arcs, and a small little free library where neighbors could exchange books. I imagined children running up to pick out a story, a feeling of community threaded through something as simple as a shared book. But, of course, not everyone appreciated my vision. Paul, my neighbor, had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, long before I moved in. He had an air of permanence about him, a sense that his way of seeing the world was the only correct one. He didn't want wildflowers. He didn't want pink accents. He didn't want creativity, whimsy, or anything that might hint at joy over order. His idea of a house was neutral, beige, and safe. Color, to him, was a challenge, a threat to the monotony he had built around himself. The complaints started immediately. Every time a new brushstroke of color appeared, Paul had an opinion. Every new plant or whimsical decoration earned a glare. He stopped by more frequently than was necessary, often leaning against the fence, arms crossed, frowning as if the world had wronged him personally. I tried to be polite. I smiled. I nodded. I reminded myself that people are entitled to opinions, even when those opinions feel unfair. But over time, the constant judgment began to feel suffocating. My space, my sanctuary, was being invaded, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, by someone who refused to accept difference. One weekend, I decided to paint custom pavers with my niece. She was 15, full of excitement and imagination, and she loved the idea of leaving our mark on the yard. We painted turtles, ladybugs, birds, and other cheerful designs, each stroke a testament to creativity, patience, and joy. I imagined the pathway welcoming anyone who walked by, a small burst of happiness in an ordinary day. But before we had even finished, Paul appeared. He leaned over the fence, arms crossed, his face a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "What are you doing now?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. I smiled faintly, hoping to diffuse the tension. "We're painting pavers. My niece and I thought it would be fun." He shook his head, muttering about eyesores and disrespect, as though the entire concept of joy were offensive. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wanted to respond calmly, to assert my boundaries without creating unnecessary conflict. And so I said, "Paul, it's time for you to grow up and get over what I'm doing with my house." The words surprised even me. I hadn't intended to be confrontational, but they felt necessary. I couldn't continue bending to his disapproval. He sputtered, incredulous. He told me I had no right to speak to him that way, that I was being disrespectful. I told him simply, "Go away, get a life." If he had so much energy to complain about a house color or a few painted pavers, perhaps he needed a hobby or a distraction. He stormed off, muttering under his breath, leaving me with my niece, who was quietly giggling at the spectacle. It wasn't the first time I'd defended my choices. It wouldn't be the last. Over time, I came to understand something important. The people who feel compelled to control others are rarely happy themselves. Paul wasn't angry because of me. He was angry because he had convinced himself that joy and color were threats. That someone else's happiness somehow diminished his. And no amount of explanation or politeness would change that. My only option was to be unapologetic, to hold my ground while maintaining my own peace. The days that followed were a mix of minor victories and quiet irritations. I continued decorating, painting, planting. The house became exactly what I wanted it to be: bright, welcoming, alive with energy and creativity. Neighbors who appreciated whimsy stopped by occasionally, leaving small gifts of encouragement or sharing stories of their own gardens. Their smiles reminded me that not everyone measures life by sameness or order. Some people see beauty where others see chaos, and that is enough. Paul continued to grumble. He would shake his head when passing, comment under his breath, and occasionally send long-winded complaints to other neighbors. But I had grown used to it. I had learned that standing up for myself and my home did not make me the antagonist. It made me the steward of my own space, the curator of my own happiness. And nothing anyone else could say or do would change that. Sometimes, at night, I would walk through the yard, barefoot, tracing my hands along the edges of the stone walls I had built around the wheat fields I planted. The stacked stones reminded me of places I had seen in pictures of Scotland and Ireland, the kind of quiet, solid beauty that existed for centuries without apology. I thought about my niece, about our painted pavers, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was mine. Entirely mine. Joyful, chaotic, alive, and unapologetic. It wasn't just about colors or pavers. It was about claiming space in the world without fear. About recognizing that boundaries are necessary, that personal expression is not negotiable, and that there are people in life whose opinions, no matter how loudly expressed, do not define you. The house became a lesson in resilience. Each flower, each painted stone, each laugh echoed through the yard as a reminder that joy is not optional and that standing firm in one's values is not selfish. It is survival. And so, every morning, I wake, make coffee, and step onto the porch. The sun falls softly on the painted walls, the wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. Children run along the path, stopping to pick a flower or read a book from the little library. The laughter, the light, the simple, unremarkable happiness feels like victory. Not over Paul, not over anyone else, but over the fear of being unseen, unheard, or diminished. I learned, in a quiet and profound way, that the beauty of life is not measured by the absence of opposition. It is measured by the courage to live authentically, unapologetically, and without fear. Paul may never understand. He may never appreciate it. But I do. My home is mine, my joy is mine, and in that, I am entirely free. I had always thought trust was simple. You love someone, you care for them, you communicate, and everything else falls into place. At least, that's what I believed until Lena's birthday party incident forced me to realize that trust is fragile, delicate, and easily shaken, even without betrayal. I'm 29, she's 27, and we had been together for 10 months. It wasn't a long time, not compared to marriages or decade-long relationships, but it was enough time to feel grounded. We had laughed, argued, shared our pasts, and even discussed moving in together the following year. In the day-to-day, things felt effortless. At least, that's how it seemed until one weekend, everything shifted without warning. It started innocuously enough. Lena told me she was going out with some friends from college on a Saturday night. I didn't mind. I had plans to watch a game with my brother. I thought nothing of it. We exchanged casual goodbyes. She left, and the evening went as expected. The next day, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. I scrolled, distractedly, until I saw a story from one of her friends. A photo of a group of people, smiling. In the caption, someone wrote, "Happy birthday, Jason." My heart skipped. I recognized the name immediately. Jason was Lena's ex, someone she had dated for 3 years. They had broken up a little over a year before Lena and I met. From what I knew, they had been serious. From what Lena had said, they were on good terms, friendly, casual, but not close. That was enough to make me pause. I waited until she came home to bring it up. Calmly, I asked, "Were you at Jason's birthday?" She looked surprised, almost as if she hadn't considered that I might notice. Then she said yes, quickly adding that it wasn't a big deal, just a group gathering, and she hadn't thought it mattered. Her words were calm, but the tone felt hollow to me. It wasn't about jealousy. I wasn't accusing her of cheating. It was the omission, the choice not to mention it until I discovered it through social media. That felt deliberate. That felt like something had been hidden. And even though she said she didn't think I would care, the sensation of being left out, of being intentionally sidelined, dug into me. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I just expressed that I would have appreciated knowing beforehand. She got defensive, saying I was overreacting, that she hadn't hidden it. But in that moment, I knew what hiding felt like. It was in the absence of transparency, in the unspoken choice to let the truth remain obscured. It was a decision she had made, perhaps small, but impactful. The evening was tense. We didn't fight outright, but the air between us shifted. She said she didn't want to make it a big deal. I nodded, understanding, but my gut told me this was more than just a minor oversight. It wasn't the party. It was how she handled it. How she dismissed my feelings. How she prioritized her comfort over honesty. Over the following days, things didn't improve. Awkward conversations popped up. She insisted I was overthinking. I tried to let it go, but the feeling of unease lingered, persistent. Every interaction carried a subtle tension, a reminder that we might not align in our expectations of trust and communication. 10 days later, I realized something critical. Lena hadn't lied in the traditional sense, but the intent to obscure the truth was there. She admitted she hadn't told me about the party because she knew how I would react. That confirmation struck me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about secrecy, it was about the fundamental difference in how we approached honesty in a relationship. She felt the need to manipulate the situation to avoid conflict. I felt the need to be treated as an equal partner, deserving of transparency. We didn't argue. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches. Instead, there was a quiet, mutual understanding that forcing the relationship forward would only create more harm. We separated not with anger, but with the recognition that our values did not align. Looking back, I realized this wasn't a failure of affection. Lena and I cared for each other deeply, but love alone is not enough. Trust and communication are the frameworks that allow love to endure. Without them, even the best intentions can crumble under the weight of withheld truths. The experience left a mark, yes, but it also taught me something invaluable. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of misalignment, to honor my instincts, and to understand that uneasy feelings in a relationship are not to be dismissed lightly. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself, and for someone you care about, is to step away before the erosion becomes irreparable. It was unfortunate. It hurt. But I walked away knowing I had respected myself, honored my feelings, and refused to compromise my boundaries for comfort. That awareness became a foundation for how I approached all future relationships, a reminder that transparency and honesty are not optional. They are essential. And that is a lesson worth every ache, every sleepless night, and every moment of quiet reflection. I never thought a late-night walk could change the way I see the world, but what happened that night still lingers in my mind, the kind of memory that sticks like a shadow at the edge of your vision. I think I need to get it off my chest, so I'm writing it here, hoping that sharing it might somehow make it feel less real. It was just past midnight when I decided to take a walk. I had been cooped up in my apartment all evening, trying to distract myself from the kind of thoughts that spiral too quickly if left alone. My city is quiet at night, almost eerily so, except for the occasional hum of a distant car or the scrape of wind against the pavement. I wrapped myself in a thick jacket, pulled my scarf tight around my neck, and stepped outside. The street was almost empty, save for the flickering street lamps that lined the sidewalk like tired sentinels. I had walked this route hundreds of times, yet that night, everything felt off. The air was colder than usual, but it wasn't the cold that made me uneasy, it was the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. I brushed it off as paranoia and started walking faster, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. About 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed something strange. In the distance, just beyond the pool of light from a street lamp, a figure stood perfectly still. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I got closer, I could make out the shape of a person, or something that looked like a person. They were wearing a long coat, their hands shoved deep into their pockets, and they were staring straight at me. I slowed down. My heart was beating faster, a drum in my chest. Something about the figure didn't feel right. There was no hat, no hair visible, just the faint outline of a head and shoulders. I told myself it was someone waiting for a friend, or maybe just standing there for some reason I couldn't see. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my footsteps, to tell myself I was imagining things. Then, the figure moved. Not a full step, just a tilt, a shift that made my stomach knot. I realized then that they had been moving in some way all along, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a shadow stretching toward me. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I tried to pass by without looking directly at them, my eyes fixed on the cracked pavement, but when I glanced up, the figure was closer. I picked up my pace, my scarf tightening uncomfortably around my neck. The street seemed to stretch longer than it should have, the shadows deeper, darker. I could feel the weight of someone, or something, behind me, moving in time with my steps. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the pavement itself was holding me down. Then I heard it, a sound so faint, I thought I was imagining it. Footsteps. Not mine, not echoing like mine, but soft, deliberate, keeping pace exactly with me. I spun around, but the street behind me was empty. No one there. Only the distant hum of the city and the flickering street lamps. I kept walking, faster now, but the footsteps continued, shadowing mine perfectly. Panic started to rise in my chest, a thick, suffocating weight. I wanted to call someone, but my phone was in my bag, tucked away, and I couldn't reach it fast enough. I told myself I was imagining things. It had to be some coincidence, some weird trick of sound and shadow. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. I turned onto a narrower street, thinking maybe I could lose them in the maze of alleys and side streets I knew so well. That's when I saw it, an apartment window, on the second floor of a building I passed every day that had always been dark. And now, a faint light glowed from within. But the light wasn't steady, it pulsed like a heartbeat, and every time it did, I thought I could see a figure moving behind the curtain, watching me. I froze. The figure in the window moved closer, pressing something against the glass. A hand. A face. I couldn't tell. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs refused. Then I felt it, a presence, not behind me this time, but right next to me. My body went cold, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. And then, a voice. Soft, almost too soft to hear, whispering directly into my ear. You shouldn't be here. I bolted. Every muscle in my body screamed as I ran, twisting through the streets I knew like the back of my hand, praying the sound of my own footsteps would drown out whatever was following me. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment building, heart hammering, lungs burning, my jacket soaked in sweat. I slammed the door shut behind me and leaned against it, gasping, trying to convince myself it had been my imagination. It wasn't. Because the next morning, when I went to check the window I had passed, the light was gone. The apartment was empty, as if it had never been occupied. I asked my neighbors about it, but they insisted no one had lived there for months. No one had. I've tried to rationalize it, really. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was hallucinating after staying up too late. But I've walked those streets countless times since, late at night, and I never see that figure again. I've never heard the footsteps again. But sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear a faint whisper, soft and deliberate, telling me, again, that I shouldn't be here. It's a strange thing, the kind of fear that doesn't attack your senses all at once but lingers, lingering at the edge of perception, like a shadow in the corner of a room. I still walk at night, sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself I'm not crazy. Or maybe I like the feeling of something watching, waiting, just out of reach, reminding me how small and fragile we really are. I don't know if anyone will read this, or if anyone even cares, but I had to tell someone. It's been months, and I still think about it almost every night. I've learned to notice shadows a little more carefully, to listen to the rhythm of footsteps that aren't mine, and to respect the quiet spaces where the world seems to hold its breath. Some things are better left unseen, some things are better left alone. But some nights, when the city is quiet and the street lamps flicker just right, I can't help but wonder if I'll see that figure again. And if I do, will I be ready? I work the night shift at a small convenience store just off a 2-lane highway. It's the kind of place most people don't even notice unless they need gas, cigarettes, or coffee at an ungodly hour. I took the job because it was quiet and paid a little extra for overnight hours. I used to like the silence. Now I don't think I'll ever be comfortable with it again. Most nights followed the same pattern. A few truckers passing through, maybe a tired college student grabbing an energy drink, then long stretches where the store felt abandoned. The lights buzzed softly overhead, the refrigerators hummed, and the security cameras clicked every few seconds as they adjusted. I usually passed the time scrolling on my phone or restocking shelves. The first strange thing happened around 2:17 a.m. I remember the time clearly because I checked it right after. The automatic door opened, chimed, and I looked up expecting a customer. No one was there. The doors slid shut again after a few seconds. I shrugged it off. Sometimes bugs triggered the sensor. Sometimes the doors just glitched. But then it happened again. And again. Every time, the same pattern. The doors opened. The chime rang. No one entered. I started getting up from behind the counter to look outside, but the parking lot was always empty. No headlights, no engine noise, nothing but the faint glow of the street lamp and the dark stretch of highway beyond it. I checked the security footage the next morning before leaving. The doors opened exactly when I remembered. The camera angle that faced the entrance showed the doors sliding apart, and nothing else. No movement. No shadow. Just empty air. A few nights later, the man appeared. He didn't come in when the doors opened on their own. He came in normally, pushing them apart with his hands. He was tall, thin, and wearing a jacket that looked too heavy for the season. His face stuck with me immediately, not because it was scary, but because it was strangely blank. His eyes were open wide, unblinking, and his mouth rested slightly open like he had forgotten to close it. He stood just inside the entrance for a long moment, staring straight ahead. "Hey," I said. "Let me know if you need anything." He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked slowly down the first aisle. I watched him on the security monitor as much as I watched him directly. Something about the way he moved felt off. Too smooth. Too deliberate. He didn't pick anything up. He just walked up and down the aisles, stopping at the end of each one, standing still for several seconds, then turning and moving on. When he reached the refrigerated section, he stopped completely. I waited. Then I asked again if he needed help. He turned his head toward me, slowly, like his neck resisted the motion. "I'm just looking," he said. His voice was calm, flat, almost rehearsed. He stayed another few minutes, then walked out without buying anything. The doors closed behind him. I watched him on the camera as he crossed the parking lot and disappeared into the darkness beyond the streetlight. No car. No sound of footsteps once he left the concrete. I felt unsettled, but I couldn't explain why. He came back the next night. Same time. Same jacket. Same blank expression. Same routine. Walk the aisles. Stop. Stand still. Leave. Every night after that, he returned. I started dreading the moment the door chime rang. The rest of the night felt tense, like the store itself was waiting for him. The hum of the lights seemed louder. The corners of the aisles felt darker. On the fifth night, I noticed something new. When he stopped at the end of an aisle, his lips moved slightly, like he was whispering. I couldn't hear anything from behind the counter, but the movement made my skin crawl. I checked the audio from the security footage later. There was nothing. No whispering. Just the hum of the refrigerators. The sixth night, he stopped closer to the counter than usual. He stood at the end of the aisle nearest me, facing my direction, eyes fixed on my face. His lips moved again. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him do anything that resembled an expression. "Practicing," he said. "Practicing what?" He didn't answer. He turned and walked out. That night, after my shift ended, I checked the footage again. When I reached the moment where he stood facing me, the video froze for 3 seconds. When it resumed, he was already walking away. I started noticing other things after that. Items moved slightly on the shelves. The coffee pot would be empty even though I hadn't poured any out. Sometimes, when I was alone behind the counter, I thought I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Then one night, the doors opened at 2:17 a.m. No chime. No footsteps. Just the sound of the doors sliding apart. I looked up slowly. He was already inside, standing directly in front of the counter. I hadn't seen him enter. I hadn't heard him. He was just there. Up close, his face looked wrong. His skin was pale, almost grey, and his eyes were glossy, like glass marbles. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. "You're better at this than the others," he said. My mouth went dry. "At what?" "Staying," he replied. "They leave too early." I felt cold all over. "You need to leave." He tilted his head, studying me. "Soon," he said. "I'm still practicing." "Practicing what?" I asked again. He smiled wider this time, stretching his mouth farther than it should have gone. "Being seen." The lights flickered. Just once. When they steadied, he was gone. The doors were closed. The store was empty. I quit the next morning. Didn't even finish my notice. The manager didn't argue. He just nodded, like he understood. I don't work nights anymore. I don't go into convenience stores after dark if I can help it. But sometimes, when I'm awake too late and the house is quiet, I swear I hear the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of a door chime that never quite finishes ringing. And I get this terrible feeling that somewhere, someone is still practicing. I started noticing the emails after I took a new job working from home. At first, I assumed they were spam, automated messages, glitches, the kind of thing you delete without thinking. But then I realized something that made my stomach drop. They were being sent from my own email address. The first one arrived at 1:09 a.m. The subject line was blank. The body contained a single sentence. "You left the bedroom light on." I was sitting in my bedroom when I read it. The light was on. I stared at the screen, then slowly looked up at the lamp beside my bed, half expecting it to turn off on its own. It didn't. I laughed it off, nervous and confused, and told myself it was some kind of spoofed email. A prank. Maybe malware. I changed my password immediately. The next night, another email arrived. "You lock the door twice now." That's new. My heart started pounding. I do lock the door twice. Always have. It's a habit I picked up years ago. I don't remember telling anyone about it. I checked the sender information, the IP addresses, the login activity. Nothing unusual. No sign of unauthorized access. The emails were legitimately sent from my account, but not from any device I owned. The third email came while I was in the kitchen making coffee. "You're standing very still." I froze. My hands were gripping the edge of the counter. I hadn't moved in several seconds. Slowly, I turned in a full circle, scanning the apartment. Everything looked normal. The door was locked. The windows were closed. The hallway outside was empty. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend that night. The emails continued anyway. "You sleep on your side when you're scared." "You stopped breathing for 7 seconds last night." "You should get more rest." I stopped opening them. I set up filters, blocked my own address, reported it to my provider. It didn't matter. The emails still came, and I could still feel them, even unread, sitting in my inbox like something alive. Then one morning, I woke up to an email that hadn't been sent during the night. It had been sent 30 seconds ago. "Look behind you." I dropped my phone and spun around. Nothing. I started checking my apartment obsessively. I bought new locks, covered the webcam, put tape over every sensor I could find. I unplugged everything that didn't need to be connected to the internet. Still, the emails kept coming. They started correcting me. "You didn't check the closet. That wasn't the right window. You missed something." I stopped sleeping. Every sound felt deliberate. Every shadow felt wrong. The apartment no longer felt like a place I lived. It felt like a place I was being observed from. One night, I received an email that was longer than the rest. "You keep trying to find me in the wrong places. I'm not hiding. I'm not watching you from outside. I'm already where you are." I felt cold all over. I typed a reply before I could stop myself. "What do you want?" The response came instantly. "To make sure you don't forget me." That night, I dreamed I was sitting at my computer, typing an email. I couldn't see the screen clearly, but I knew what I was writing. When I woke up, my laptop was open. An email draft sat on the screen. The cursor blinked at the end of a sentence I don't remember typing. I see you too. I don't live in that apartment anymore. I deleted the email account. I changed jobs. I moved cities. But sometimes, when I'm tired, when I zone out staring at my screen, my fingers start typing on their own. And for just a moment, I feel like I'm not alone in my head anymore. I started house-sitting for my aunt while she was away for a few months. She lived in a small, isolated town where the streets emptied after sunset and most of the houses looked like they hadn't been updated since the 80s. Her place sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, backed up against a thin line of woods. I'd visited before, but living there alone felt different. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where every sound feels intentional. The first few nights were uneventful. I fell into a routine: lock the doors, check the windows, turn off the lights, go to bed. Around midnight, the house would settle with soft pops and creaks, nothing unusual. I slept fine. The fifth night is when I heard the knock. It came from the front door. 3 slow taps. Not loud, not urgent. Just deliberate. I checked the time, 2:34 a.m. I didn't answer. I stayed still, listening. After about 10 seconds, I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy, moving away from the door. I peeked through the curtains. The porch was empty. No car, no silhouette, no movement beyond the weak glow of the porch light. The next night, it happened again. Same time. Same 3 knocks. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? Someone knocked and left. I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe some local kids testing houses late at night. On the 3rd night, the knock came from the back door. I froze in bed, heart pounding. The back door faced the woods. There was no porch there, just a small concrete step and darkness beyond it. The knock was slower this time, heavier. I didn't move. After the knocking stopped, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not retreating. Circling the house. Slow crunches on gravel. Pausing occasionally, like whoever it was stopping to listen. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stayed perfectly still until the sounds faded. The next morning, I found muddy footprints outside every door. Front, back, even beneath the windows. Bare footprints. Large. Too large to be a child's. I called my aunt and told her what happened. She laughed it off, said the town had always been strange, and suggested I stop watching scary videos before bed. The knocks continued. Every night. Always around 2:30 a.m. Sometimes at the front door. Sometimes the back. Once, against the side of the house near the bedroom window. I started sleeping with the lights on. I stacked furniture in front of the doors. Still, the knocking came. Then one night, it changed. Instead of knocking, I heard the doorknob turn. Slowly, carefully, as if whoever was outside didn't want to make noise. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, listening to the soft click of the handle moving back and forth. Then it stopped. A few seconds passed, and then a voice spoke from just outside the door. "I know you're awake." It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It sounded calm, familiar, somehow. I didn't respond. The voice sighed. "I just want to come in." The footsteps retreated. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I packed a bag and considered leaving, but something stopped me. I felt watched during the day too, like the woods behind the house were paying attention. I kept catching movement between the trees that vanished when I looked directly at it. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, determined to stay awake and face whatever was happening. At 2:31 a.m., the knocking started. Not on the door, on the walls, all around the house. Slow taps. Moving. Circling. Like fingers tracing the perimeter. I stood in the middle of the room, shaking, as the sounds grew closer together. Then everything went silent. The front door creaked open. I stared at it, frozen. I was sure I had locked it. The door opened just a few inches, then stopped. Something breathed from the other side. "Thank you," the voice whispered. The lights went out. When they came back on, the door was closed. Locked. The house was empty. I left the next morning and never went back. A week later, my aunt called me, confused. She asked why I'd unlocked the back door before leaving. I told her I hadn't. She paused, then said, "That's strange. The back door only unlocks from the inside." I still don't sleep well. Sometimes, around 2:30 a.m., I hear a soft knock on my apartment door, on my bedroom wall, on the inside of my head. 3 slow taps, waiting for me to answer. I never believed in rules for places until I moved into that apartment. It was cheap in a way that should have warned me. A 1-bedroom on the edge of town, close enough to hear traffic but far enough that the streets emptied at night. The landlord didn't ask many questions. He slid the lease across the table, avoided eye contact, and said something that stuck with me even then. Most people don't stay long. I assumed he meant students or short-term renters. I didn't press him. I needed somewhere to live, and the place looked fine during the day. Clean, quiet, normal. The first week passed without incident. The second week, I found the list. It was taped to the inside of the hall closet door, hidden behind my coats. A single sheet of lined paper, yellowed at the edges, written in neat, careful handwriting. I assumed it was left behind by the previous tenant. It was titled simply, "Things to Remember at Night." The list had rules, not suggestions. Rules. Always lock the bedroom door before midnight. If you hear your name, do not answer. Do not look into the hallway mirror between 2:11 and 2:33 a.m. If the closet door is open, close it immediately and leave the room. If you wake up and cannot move, keep your eyes closed. If something knocks from inside the apartment, pretend you don't hear it. If you break a rule, do not panic. Panic makes it worse. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud and shook my head. It was obviously a prank. Some edgy former tenant trying to creep out the next person. I ripped the paper down, folded it, and tossed it into the kitchen trash. That night, I forgot about it. At 12:07 a.m., I realized I hadn't locked my bedroom door. I was already in bed, lights off, phone charging on the nightstand. I lay there for a moment, debating whether it was worth getting up. The hallway outside my bedroom was dark, the kind of dark that feels thicker than it should. I told myself I was being stupid. I got up and locked the door. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up suddenly, heart racing for no reason I could identify. The apartment was silent. No traffic. No neighbors. Just the hum of the refrigerator somewhere far away. I rolled over and froze. Across the room, reflected faintly in the darkness, was the hallway mirror. I had left my bedroom door open when I went to bed. I stared at the mirror, my mind trying to catch up. I couldn't see much, just a sliver of the hallway, the bathroom door, the edge of the living room. Everything looked normal. Then something moved. Not in my room. In the reflection. A shape passed slowly through the hallway, too tall, too thin, its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. It didn't walk. It glided, like it wasn't quite touching the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Seconds. Minutes. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I rolled out of bed, slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid down against it, shaking. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, the list was back, taped neatly to my bedroom door. The trash can in the kitchen was empty. I read the rules again, slower this time. My hands were sweating. I noticed something I hadn't before. The handwriting wasn't shaky. It wasn't rushed. It looked practiced, like someone who had written this list many times. I tried to leave that day. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and stepped into the hallway. As soon as I did, the air felt wrong. Heavy. Pressurized. My ears popped like I was changing altitude. The hallway mirror was covered now. A blanket had been draped over it, pinned carefully at the corners. I hadn't done that. I reached for the front door and stopped. There were scratch marks on the inside of it. Long, shallow grooves, starting near the handle and trailing downward, like something had dragged its fingers while standing very close. I stood there for a long time before unlocking the door. Nothing happened. I left, went to work, tried to act normal. I told myself I'd come back, grab the rest of my things, and break the lease. But when I returned that evening, exhausted and jumpy, the apartment looked wrong. The furniture had shifted. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. The couch angled slightly differently. A chair pulled out from the table. The closet door in the hallway was open. I remembered rule number 4. I crossed the apartment in 3 long strides, slammed the closet door shut, and turned away immediately. Something exhaled behind me. Not a breath from lungs. A slow release of air, like pressure escaping. I didn't look. I walked straight into my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the bed until my legs stopped shaking. That night, I followed the rules. I locked the door before midnight. I didn't look at the mirror. When I heard faint tapping from the living room wall, 3 soft knocks, spaced evenly, I stared at the floor and pretended I didn't hear it. The knocking continued for hours. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the tapping stopped. At 2:33 a.m., I heard something laugh. It sounded almost like me. The next morning, there was a new rule added to the list. Do not trust the voice. It learns quickly. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped sleeping normally. Every night became a careful performance. Lock. Check. Avoid. Pretend. Some nights were quiet. Others were not. Sometimes I would wake up unable to move, my body heavy and useless, pressure pressing down on my chest. I'd keep my eyes closed, just like the rule said, and listen as something paced slowly around my bed, stopping inches from my face. I could feel it leaning down, smiling. One night, I broke a rule. I heard my name. It came from the kitchen, soft and familiar, spoken in my own voice. Hey, it said. Come here. Before I could stop myself, I whispered, what? The apartment went silent. The pressure hit instantly. My ears rang. The walls creaked like the building was settling, but deeper, louder. The bedroom door rattled violently. Something slammed against it once. Twice. Then fingers began sliding underneath the door, stretching impossibly long, feeling along the floor like blind worms searching for a crack. I screamed. The fingers withdrew. The door went still. In the morning, the list had been rewritten. The rules were longer now. More detailed. More desperate. At the bottom, in darker ink, a sentence had been added. If it starts talking like you, it's already too close. I tried to move out again. This time, I made it to my car. I drove for hours, aimlessly, until the sun came up. I slept in a parking lot, convinced I'd escaped. When I woke up, the list was sitting on the passenger seat. The paper was damp, like it had been handled by wet hands. That was when I understood. The apartment wasn't the problem. It was the thing that had lured me there. I don't know where it is now. I don't know how far it can follow. I still hear knocks sometimes, from inside my walls, from inside rooms I know are empty. I still lock my bedroom door before midnight. I still don't answer when I hear my name. And every night, I pray I don't wake up and find a new rule added to the list, because I don't know how many more chances it's willing to give me. I used to think I was unlucky. That was the easiest explanation. Some people just draw the short straw over and over again, right? Jobs didn't stick, managers turned cold, customers complained, and somehow I always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. At first, it felt random. Then it felt cruel. And eventually, it felt personal in a way I couldn't explain. I'm 24 now, but this all started a few years ago, right after I finished my education. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't careless. If anything, I was desperate to prove myself. I took whatever work I could find: cafes, bookstores, libraries, tutoring gigs, grocery stores. Sometimes I worked 2 jobs at once. I told myself I was building experience, expanding my resume, learning how the real world worked. Most of the jobs followed the same pattern. The first few weeks would be fine. I'd learn the routines, get along with co-workers, maybe even feel like I was finally settling in. Then something strange would happen. A customer would complain about me, but the complaint wouldn't match anything I remembered doing. A review would appear online describing an employee who sounded suspiciously like me, accusing me of behavior I'd never engaged in. Once, a manager pulled me aside and asked why I'd accessed inappropriate websites using the staff Wi-Fi, something I absolutely had not done. I defended myself every time. Sometimes they believed me, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes it didn't matter. I'd be let go quietly, or my hours would be cut until quitting felt inevitable. The shortest job lasted less than 3 weeks. The longest didn't even make it to a year. Each time, I told myself it was just bad luck. Each time, I swallowed the humiliation and applied somewhere new. And every time, my girlfriend was there for me. Her name was Janice. She was 5 years older than me, confident in a way I admired, calm when I was anxious. We'd been together for over 2 years. She knew everything, every firing, every awkward meeting, every moment I came home feeling hollow and embarrassed. She held me while I spiraled. She reassured me that none of it defined me. She told me I was smart, capable, and unlucky in a way that would eventually pass. I believed her because I needed to. By the time I started working part-time at a small neighborhood bakery, I was already exhausted. Not physically, mentally. I'd learned to expect the worst even when things were going well. Still, the bakery felt different. The staff was small. The owner-manager seemed kind. I told myself this one would last. For over 2 months, nothing went wrong. Then one afternoon, my manager asked to speak with me in her office. She didn't look angry, just uncomfortable. She showed me a printed Google review. Someone had written a long, detailed complaint about an employee who was rude, inappropriate, and unprofessional. The description matched my shift almost perfectly. On that day, I'd been the only one working. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't panic the way I used to. I explained, calmly, that this had happened before. That someone seemed to have it out for me. That the accusations didn't reflect my behavior at all. To my surprise, she believed me. She told me she'd dismissed the review and thanked me for being upfront. I went home shaken, but relieved. For once, nothing had exploded. I didn't tell Janice about it. That should have been my first real warning sign, the fact that I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I was tired of sounding broken. I wanted one normal evening. We talked about dinner, about her day, about nothing important. Later that night, she left the room to shower. Her phone was on the table. It buzzed. I wasn't snooping. I swear that. The screen lit up, and I couldn't help but see it. A notification from Google. Something about a manager responding to a review. The username attached to the review response was unmistakable. It was the same strange name I'd seen earlier that day. My heart didn't race. It sank. Like something inside me had finally snapped into place. I didn't confront her. I didn't say anything at all. I told myself I was jumping to conclusions. That there had to be another explanation. That paranoia had been eating at me for too long, and I couldn't let it ruin the one stable thing I had left. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew heavier with every passing hour. 2 days later, I told her I needed to book a train ticket to visit my father. She offered to let me use her account. When she went to shower, I opened her email. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't not look. It didn't take long. There was an email she'd sent to herself. Attached was a spreadsheet. I opened it. I still remember the way my hands felt, cold and numb, like they didn't belong to me anymore. The spreadsheet contained my entire life. Every job I'd ever had. Every workplace email. Passwords. Shift schedules. Names and phone numbers of co-workers. Notes about which managers were easiest to contact. Fake accounts linked to complaint platforms. Email templates. Timelines. It wasn't chaos. It was organized. Efficient. Methodical. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned. I sent the file to myself. I took screenshots. I printed it out. I don't remember deciding to do those things. I just did them, like muscle memory taking over when your brain can't cope. When Janice left for work, I packed. I didn't take anything sentimental. Just essentials. Clothes. Documents. My laptop. I felt like I was being watched even though she wasn't there. Like the walls knew what I'd discovered. I called my boss and said I needed time off. I didn't explain. I didn't have the words. Then I went to my dad's. The moment I walked into his house, I broke. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child, deep, uncontrollable sobs that left me gasping. He didn't ask questions at first. He just let me fall apart. Over the next few days, he helped me piece together what to do. Police. A lawyer. A therapist. I slept on the couch because I couldn't stand the thought of being alone in a room with a door that locked. Janice tried to contact me. I didn't respond. Eventually, I sent one message. It was short. Final. I told her it was over. That I knew what she'd done. My father handled the rest. The legal process was slow and terrifying. Every email notification made my chest tighten. Every unfamiliar number felt like a threat. I changed every password. Deleted accounts. Locked down my digital footprint until it felt like I barely existed online at all. In the end, we didn't go to court. Some people think that means she won. It doesn't feel that way to me. I couldn't survive a public trial. I could barely survive knowing what she'd done. Watching her face consequences wouldn't have erased the damage, it would have stretched it out, kept me trapped in it longer. Instead, everything was settled privately. I moved. I found a stable job under tighter security. I stayed in therapy. Slowly, painfully, I learned how to trust my own reality again. It's been years now. I still get anxious when something goes wrong at work. I still keep my accounts private. I still flinch at unexpected emails. But I haven't had a panic attack in months. I sleep through most nights. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me. If she knows this story exists out there somewhere. But it doesn't matter. What matters is this: I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't broken. I wasn't incompetent. I was being sabotaged by the person who told me she loved me. I woke up 2 days before my wedding feeling strangely calm. That surprised me. Everyone had warned me that the days leading up to it would be chaotic, full of nerves and last-minute disasters, but instead I felt steady. Happy. Like I had finally arrived at a point in my life where everything made sense. My fiancé was already up, making coffee in the kitchen, humming softly to himself. That sound alone grounded me. 3 years together, a little over 1 year engaged, and somehow he still felt like my safest place. We'd grown into each other naturally, without drama, without games. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. I checked my phone while still half asleep, expecting nothing more than a few group messages or maybe an email from the venue. Instead, I saw a wall of text from my best friend. The timestamp said 6:04 a.m. At first, I smiled. He and I had known each other since freshman year of college. Over a decade of friendship. Inside jokes no one else understood. Late night talks about everything and nothing. He was part of the furniture of my life, something constant and familiar. Seeing his name pop up felt normal. Then I started reading. The message was long. Too long. Paragraph after paragraph poured down my screen, each sentence heavier than the last. He wrote about timing, about fear, about how he'd never been brave enough. He wrote about watching me fall in love with someone else and hoping, stupidly, that it would somehow fall apart on its own. He wrote about loving me quietly, patiently, for years. Then came the part that made my stomach turn cold. He asked me to call off the wedding. He said it wasn't too late. He said we could leave, start over, finally be together the way we were meant to be. I stared at my phone, numb. My hands started shaking, not because I was conflicted, but because something sacred had just been ripped open without my consent. I didn't love him like that. I never had. What hurt the most wasn't the confession itself. It was the realization that our entire friendship had been built on something uneven. That while I'd been living honestly, he'd been waiting, watching, hoping for my life to fall apart so he could step in. I felt nauseous. I put the phone down and sat there in silence, listening to the coffee machine finish its cycle, listening to my fiancé move around the kitchen, completely unaware that my world had just tilted. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The next several hours passed in a blur. I went through the motions of the day, nodded when spoken to, smiled when expected. But inside, my thoughts spiraled. How long had he felt this way? Had every supportive word come with an agenda? Had every laugh, every shared memory, been filtered through hope that I'd someday choose him instead? The betrayal sat heavy in my chest. I was also angry. Deeply, quietly angry. Not because he had feelings happen, but because of the timing. 2 days before my wedding. 2 days before one of the most important moments of my life. He hadn't chosen honesty. He'd chosen chaos. By the time my fiancé came home that evening, I was emotionally exhausted. I told him we needed to talk. He could hear it in my voice immediately. He sat down across from me, concern etched into his face, and waited. I showed him the message. I watched his expression change as he read. Surprise first. Then disbelief. Then anger, not directed at me, but at the situation. At the audacity of it. I started apologizing instinctively, words tumbling out of me even though I hadn't done anything wrong. He stopped me gently. He told me I didn't owe him an apology, that I hadn't betrayed him, that this wasn't my fault. That moment alone reminded me why I was marrying him. We talked for a long time. I answered every question honestly, not because he demanded it, but because transparency felt necessary. I even showed him old messages between my friend and me, not because there was anything to hide, but because I wanted him to see the truth as clearly as I did. There had been no emotional affair, no crossed lines, no secret longing on my side. My fiancé admitted that he'd always suspected my friend had a crush on me, but that he believed it was harmless and respectful. Until now. Then he asked me what I wanted to do. That question mattered. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't claim ownership over the situation. He gave the choice back to me. I told him the truth. That as much as it hurt, I didn't want my friend at the wedding. I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to make the day about himself. I didn't trust that he could sit there and celebrate a marriage he'd just tried to sabotage. We wrote a response together. Short, clear, firm. I told my friend that he had misunderstood our relationship, that the wedding was still happening, and that it would be best if he didn't attend. I made sure the message came from me, not filtered through my fiancé, because I knew how narratives could twist if left unchecked. Then we waited. The hours between sending that message and receiving his reply were agonizing. I checked my phone obsessively. My fiancé asked if I wanted to block him immediately, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me wanted to believe that after everything, he would respond with grace. He didn't. When the message finally came through, it was longer than the first. And crueler. He accused me of leading him on for over a decade. He said I had used him, manipulated him. He said he hoped my fiancé would leave me. He said things I still struggle to repeat, wishes of infertility, of loneliness, of regret. It felt like reading words written by a stranger. I broke down completely. My fiancé took my phone and left the room. I don't know exactly what he said to my former friend. I didn't ask. All I know is that when he came back, the color had drained from his face, and he told me it was done. My friend was blocked. On everything. He wouldn't be coming to the wedding. Our best man and maid of honor were informed. They handled everything quietly, discreetly. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone else. I didn't have to relive it again and again. And then, somehow, the wedding day arrived. I expected to feel sadness, grief for the friendship I'd lost. But standing there, surrounded by people who loved us genuinely, something shifted. The absence didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Not after seeing who my friend really was when he didn't get what he wanted. The wedding was beautiful, joyful, light. I laughed. I danced. I cried the good kind of tears. If my former friend tried to show up, I never knew about it. If he watched from a distance, unseen, that was his burden to carry, not mine. Now, looking back from the other side of the honeymoon, I understand something I didn't before. Love doesn't wait in the shadows, hoping someone's happiness collapses. Love doesn't demand last-minute sacrifices or dramatic gestures. Love respects boundaries. Love speaks up before it turns into resentment. I didn't lose a best friend. I lost an illusion. And in return, I gained clarity, peace, and a marriage built on honesty instead of hidden expectations. Sometimes the hardest endings happen right before the happiest beginnings. And sometimes, letting go is the only way forward. I used to think birthdays were silly. Just another day on the calendar, another excuse to feel older. That was before I learned how much they can hurt when the people you love treat them like they don't matter. I turned 21 on a Sunday. That detail matters more than it should, because it meant there were no work excuses, no late shifts, no unavoidable obligations. Just a day that existed quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. My boyfriend and I had been together for almost 3 years. We met when we were young and figuring ourselves out, and in a lot of ways we grew up together. He lived with his mom. He'd dropped out of school. I was still studying, still trying to build something stable for myself. We talked often about moving in together someday, about the future, about how things would be better once everything settled. Birthdays mattered to me. He knew that. I'd told him more than once. Not in a demanding way, not with expectations of extravagance, just with honesty. I liked feeling remembered, chosen. I liked knowing that once a year, someone paused their world to acknowledge mine. For his birthdays, I always tried. I saved money. I baked cakes from scratch even when they came out a little uneven. I wrote cards that took me hours to finish because I wanted the words to be right. I didn't do it because I expected something in return. I did it because I loved him. The first year, he was great. Thoughtful. Present. It felt balanced. The second year, we celebrated my birthday late. He said he was tired from work. I told myself it was fine. People get tired. Life happens. I swallowed the disappointment and moved on. This year was different. I turned 21. That felt big to me. Not because of alcohol or legality or anything like that, but because it felt like a threshold. Like stepping into adulthood with intention. I bought a new dress weeks in advance, a soft pink one I'd been saving for, imagining how it would feel to wear it out to dinner, maybe take a photo together, something simple but meaningful. All week, I talked about my birthday. Casually. Lightly. My birthday's coming up. I can't believe I'll be 21. He nodded. Smiled. Acted like he heard me. Sunday afternoon, I texted him to confirm our plans. Nothing elaborate. Just checking in. That's when the tone shifted. He replied vaguely. Then defensively. Then dismissively. He told me he'd already made plans. He said he didn't think it was a big deal. He suggested we celebrate another day, like last year. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of it. I reminded him that it was my birthday. That I thought we were doing something together. He told me I was overreacting. That I should be grateful he was even willing to reschedule. The words stung more than I expected. I asked why he hadn't told me earlier. He said he forgot, even though I'd mentioned it all week. Then he went out. I stayed home. I changed into the dress anyway, even though there was nowhere to go. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, trying to convince myself I looked silly for caring this much. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was too old to feel this hurt over a single day. But the silence was loud. I spent my 21st birthday alone in my room, scrolling through messages from friends who assumed I was out celebrating. I didn't correct them. I didn't want to explain. My boyfriend didn't text. The next day, he suggested we celebrate properly later. He said I owed him an apology for being ungrateful. Something in me cracked. It wasn't just about the birthday. It was about the pattern. About how my feelings always seemed negotiable, something to be postponed or minimized as long as it was convenient for him. About how effort flowed one way. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. To feel without being told how to feel. When I finally did respond, it turned into a long conversation. Messages back and forth that spiraled into something ugly. He accused me of guilt-tripping him. I told him I felt invisible. He told me I was too sensitive. I told him I felt taken for granted. He apologized, but the apology felt hollow, like something he'd learned to say without changing anything. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying our entire relationship in my head. The good moments, the laughter, the comfort, and then the moments where I'd shrunk myself to keep the peace. I realized something terrifying. If this was how he treated something he knew mattered to me, how would he treat bigger things later on? The next evening, I told him I needed to talk. I'd rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times. I thought it would break me. It didn't. I told him I couldn't keep doing this, that I needed a partner who showed up without being reminded, who didn't treat my needs like inconveniences, who didn't make me feel guilty for wanting to be celebrated. He was shocked, angry, then sad, then desperate. He sent messages I didn't have the energy to answer. Long paragraphs about how he loved me, how he'd change, how he couldn't imagine life without me. Reading them hurt, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. Because love shouldn't require begging for effort. We broke up. I cried for days afterward, not because I doubted the decision, but because letting go of someone you planned a future with always hurts, even when it's necessary. Looking back now, I don't think he was a bad person. I think he was immature, comfortable, unwilling to grow at the same pace I was growing. My 21st birthday didn't look the way I imagined. There was no dinner, no photos, no candlelit moment. But it gave me something else. Clarity. Sometimes the most important gift you receive isn't wrapped, isn't planned, isn't even wanted at first. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that you deserve more than half-effort love. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I started finding the notes in my apartment a few weeks after my roommate moved out. At first, I thought he was messing with me. We didn't part on bad terms, but he had a weird sense of humor, and the timing lined up just well enough for it to make sense. The first note was stuck to the fridge with a magnet, written on a scrap of paper torn from a notebook. You should close the window at night. I stared at it for a long time before checking the windows. They were all closed, locked. I crumpled the note and threw it away, telling myself it was probably left over from my roommate, something he forgot to clean up. 2 days later, there was another note. Don't sleep with your back to the door. That one was on my nightstand. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there when I went to bed. I checked the apartment, every room, every closet. Nothing. No signs of a break-in. No missing items. I changed the locks anyway. The notes kept coming. Always short. Always written in the same uneven handwriting. Sometimes they were warnings. Sometimes they were observations. You hum when you're nervous. You forgot to lock the bathroom window tonight. You check the hallway mirror too often. I stopped sleeping. I started leaving lights on in every room. I set up a camera in the living room, then another in the hallway. Every morning, I checked the footage. Nothing. The notes still appeared. One night, I stayed awake in bed, pretending to sleep, barely breathing, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard the faintest sound. Paper sliding against wood. I kept my eyes closed, heart racing. Then I felt it. The mattress shifted. Just slightly. Like someone sitting on the edge of the bed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The weight lingered for a few seconds, then lifted. A soft footstep retreated. The bedroom door closed silently. In the morning, there was a new note on my chest. You did very well tonight. I left the apartment that day and stayed with a friend. I didn't tell them everything. I couldn't. I tried to convince myself that once I left, it would stop. It didn't. The notes started appearing in my car, on my desk at work. Once, folded neatly inside my jacket pocket. You shouldn't run. You're safer when I can see you. The last note came yesterday. It was stuck to my bedroom mirror in my new place. You forgot something. I don't know what I forgot. I don't know what it wants. But every night now, when I lie down, I make sure I don't turn my back to the door, just in case it's watching. I started getting phone calls from my own number about a month ago. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth before bed. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter, and when I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. The caller ID showed my name. My number. I assumed it was a glitch, maybe a spam call spoofing my contact info. I let it ring. It stopped after about 10 seconds. No voicemail. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 11:58 p.m. This time, I answered. There was no greeting on the other end. Just silence. Not dead silence, there was a faint background noise, like air moving through a room. Hello, I said. I heard a soft click, and the call ended. I laughed it off and went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking I heard my phone vibrating even when it wasn't. The third night, the call came earlier. 11:12 p.m. I answered immediately. This time, I could hear breathing. Slow. Controlled. Close to the microphone. That's not funny, I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. The breathing paused. Then a voice spoke. Why do you always lock the door before checking the windows? I felt cold all over. That was my habit. I'd done it for years, without thinking. I never mentioned it to anyone. Who is this? I asked. The voice didn't answer. The call ended. I checked my call logs. The call showed as outgoing. From me. I stopped answering after that, but the calls didn't stop. They came every night, slowly getting earlier. Sometimes they rang for minutes. Sometimes they stopped the moment I picked up my phone, like whoever was calling knew. Then the voicemails started. I'd wake up to notifications and find recordings that were just a few seconds long. At first, it was silence. Then faint sounds. Footsteps. A chair creaking. A door opening. Sounds from inside my apartment. One voicemail was longer than the rest. I heard myself breathing. Not recorded through the phone. Breathing the way you do when you're asleep. I didn't recognize when it was recorded, but I knew it was me. I went to my service provider. They couldn't explain it. There was no evidence of call forwarding. No duplicate SIM. No suspicious activity. According to their system, all the calls originated from my device. I stopped bringing my phone into the bedroom. I left it charging in the kitchen at night. The calls still came. One night, I woke up to the sound of my ringtone. Not from the kitchen. From beside my bed. My phone was on the nightstand. I hadn't brought it there. I stared at it as it vibrated, my number glowing on the screen. Slowly, I answered. This time, there was no breathing. Just my voice. Calm. Quiet. Speaking slowly. You keep missing it, it said. I only exist when you're not paying attention. What are you? I whispered. A pause. Then, I'm what stays when you hang up. The call ended. I didn't sleep after that. I sat against the wall, watching the phone like it might move on its own. In the morning, I checked my call history again. There was one outgoing call I didn't remember making. Duration, 6 hours. Last night. I moved out a week later. New place. New locks. New routine. I changed my number yesterday. Tonight, at 11:58 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown caller. I answered without thinking. There was a familiar pause. Then my voice spoke softly from the other end. Why did you think changing numbers would matter?
Hello, and welcome. Before we begin, I want to warn you that the stories you're about to hear are based on real events, real people, and true crimes that shocked communities and left lasting scars. Everything you hear tonight is drawn from facts, court records, and news reports. If you are easily disturbed, please consider listening with caution. For those of you who are still here, I want to ask, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you like content like this, make sure to subscribe, so you never miss a story that chills you to the bone. We begin in a quiet suburban town. On the surface, it seemed peaceful, children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging polite greetings, the occasional dog barking. But behind one particular house, a darkness had been festering for years. The residents were unaware of the man living there, a man who had spent months carefully documenting the movements of people in his neighborhood, memorizing their routines, the times they left for work, when they returned. No one suspected that behind his friendly smile and waving hand, he was plotting. One evening, a young woman walking her dog noticed a strange vehicle parked along the street. It had no plates, and the driver seemed to be watching the houses intently. She dismissed it at first, telling herself she was being paranoid, but a feeling of unease gnawed at her. That feeling turned out to be justified. Over the following weeks, police would uncover items hidden in the man's home, items belonging to people who had vanished without a trace. Jewelry, personal belongings, even clothing. It became clear that the man had been abducting his victims, holding them in a secret room he had built behind a false wall. He was arrested after a neighbor reported suspicious sounds, and what authorities found inside was unimaginable, evidence of crimes that had remained unsolved for years. Moving across the country, another case unfolded in a rural area, where the forested roads are quiet and the nights are darker than anywhere else. A family had moved into an isolated farmhouse, unaware that the previous tenant had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Locals whispered about strange noises in the night, doors creaking open when no one was home, lights flickering in patterns that couldn't be explained. One night, a teenage girl woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. At first, she thought it was her parents, but the footsteps stopped at her door. A shadow passed across her window. She froze, unable to breathe, as someone quietly knocked, then disappeared. Authorities later found that the previous tenant had been a serial intruder, targeting families who had recently moved into rural homes. He had recorded everything, every movement, every conversation, before he struck. His collection of photographs and video footage was extensive, and police were horrified at the calculated nature of his crimes. He didn't just commit crimes, he orchestrated fear. The most chilling detail was that he had visited homes without ever being seen, slipping in and out, leaving families unaware of how close the danger had been. Not far from there, a city case tells of a man who seemed harmless, even charitable. He volunteered at soup kitchens, attended local events, and smiled easily at strangers. But behind closed doors, he kept a journal detailing plans that were meticulous and disturbing. He had studied law enforcement protocols, noting when officers were least likely to patrol certain neighborhoods. Over several years, he committed a string of burglaries that escalated into violent crimes. His first victims were chosen at random, but over time, he targeted people he considered vulnerable, documenting each crime with cold precision. What ultimately led to his arrest was not a slip in planning but a single detail. One victim had managed to leave a hidden message in their home. When authorities discovered it, it revealed patterns that connected the dots across multiple cases. Then there's the story of a traveling salesman in the 1980s, a man who crisscrossed the country, charming everyone he met. He had a knack for blending into any environment, earning trust almost instantly. But in every town he visited, people began to disappear. Women, primarily, vanishing without a trace. His arrest came only after decades of investigations, after a retired detective noticed similarities between unsolved cases in different states. He had been meticulous, erasing almost every clue, relying on the transient nature of his work to stay unnoticed. What investigators discovered was chilling. Notebooks filled with coded records, locations marked on maps, dates of travel, all pointing to a methodical pattern of abduction and murder that spanned the nation. As we explore these stories, it's important to remember that the people involved were real, and the victims' lives mattered. Their fear, pain, and suffering were genuine. And yet, there's a strange fascination we feel when confronted with evil that hides behind ordinary faces. The man next door, the friendly volunteer, the charming traveler, anyone could be harboring secrets unimaginable. Another case takes us to a small coastal town. A fisherman was found dead in his boat one morning. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, an unfortunate mishap at sea. But detectives noticed subtle signs. The ropes tied in an unusual way, a small piece of cloth that didn't belong to the victim, and a trail leading back to a warehouse along the docks. Inside, investigators found evidence of a criminal operation that had remained undetected for years. The perpetrator had been using the guise of fishing and shipping to cover illegal activities, including smuggling and kidnapping. The discovery shocked the town. People realized that danger had been lurking under the guise of normalcy for years, hidden behind the rhythm of everyday life. And then there is the unsettling story of a neighbor who noticed the smell first. It was faint at first, almost dismissible, but it lingered in the hallways, growing stronger day by day. The apartment next door was abandoned, or so it seemed. When authorities were finally called, they found a scene that defied understanding. The perpetrator had been keeping victims confined in the apartment, sustaining them just enough to prevent escape or death while inflicting psychological torment. Letters, recordings, and photographs documented months of abuse. The most chilling aspect was the meticulous care the criminal had taken to avoid detection. Soundproofing, careful disposal of evidence, and calculated timing of movements, so neighbors never suspected a thing. Sometimes, true crime is terrifying not because of the acts themselves, but because of the planning, the patience, and the cold rationality behind them. Each of these cases reveals a disturbing pattern. The most dangerous people often appear ordinary. They live among us, smiling, nodding, participating in communities, while hiding a reality too dark to imagine. In another haunting story, a young couple rented a cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway. They arrived to serene surroundings, expecting nothing but quiet and solitude. But the first night, they noticed a car parked far down the dirt road, headlights off, engine running. Assuming it was another visitor, they tried to ignore it. The second night, the car returned. This time, there was a figure standing near the edge of the woods, watching. Panicked, they left early the next morning. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented investigations. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If this type of content is not for you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the outside world fade for a while. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a small city where public transportation was the backbone of daily life. Thousands of people rode the same buses and trains every day, often recognizing faces without ever learning names. One of those familiar faces belonged to a man who had been driving a late-night bus route for years. He was known as quiet, reliable, and punctual. Riders trusted him without thinking twice. The first disappearance connected to this story involved a young woman who worked evenings. She was last seen boarding the bus just after midnight. Security cameras showed her stepping on, scanning her pass, and taking a seat near the back. She never exited at her stop. Her phone last pinged near the bus depot, then went silent. At the time, police believed she may have left voluntarily. Months later, another rider vanished. Then another. Each disappearance occurred late at night, always on the same route, always when the bus was nearly empty. Because public transportation footage is often overwritten quickly, crucial evidence was lost before anyone realized there was a pattern. The connection finally emerged when a transit supervisor noticed irregularities in the vehicle logs. The bus in question showed unexplained delays, short gaps where the GPS signal dropped, always in the same industrial area near the edge of the city. When confronted, the driver blamed technical issues. No one questioned him further. A breakthrough came when a passenger narrowly escaped. A man riding the bus noticed the driver pulling off route and slowing near an abandoned lot. Sensing something was wrong, he exited the bus early and reported the incident. Investigators reviewed what little footage remained and identified the driver as the common link. A search of a nearby warehouse revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing passengers. Bags, jackets, identification cards. Everything was stored carefully. Investigators realized the driver used his position to isolate victims, choosing times when no one would notice a missing rider. Another case tied to this investigation involved a woman who reported being followed after exiting the same bus line weeks earlier. She described a man in a transit uniform who walked behind her for several blocks before turning away. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. In hindsight, it became chilling. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered complaints that had been dismissed for years. Riders had reported feeling uncomfortable, noticing the bus doors remained closed longer than necessary, or that the driver watched them through the mirror. Each report alone seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a disturbing picture. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from the driver's routine. He memorized passenger habits. Who rode alone? Who fell asleep? Who wore headphones and wouldn't hear the doors open? He relied on exhaustion and trust. In another city connected to this case, police uncovered a similar pattern involving a train attendant who had access to restricted areas and maintenance tunnels. Although the crimes were never proven to be linked, investigators noted the same theme: authority, familiarity, and access. What makes this story disturbing is how ordinary it all seemed. Public transportation is something millions rely on every day. It's routine, predictable, and that predictability was used against unsuspecting people. True crime often shows us that danger doesn't look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like a uniform, a schedule, a service we depend on. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the room grow still. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you come back often for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a place people rarely think about after leaving it: a parking garage. The kind attached to offices, hospitals, and shopping centers. Bright during the day, empty and echoing at night. In one mid-sized city, a series of disappearances began quietly, spaced far enough apart that no immediate connection was made. The first person vanished after finishing a late shift at a medical office. Security footage showed her walking into the garage, keys in hand, phone pressed to her ear. She never reached her car. Her vehicle remained parked where she'd left it. Police initially believed she may have met someone she knew. Months later, a college student disappeared under similar circumstances. Then a retail worker. Then an older man who volunteered at a community center. Different ages. Different backgrounds. The only shared detail was where they were last seen. The parking garage sat between several buildings and was used by hundreds of people each day. It had security cameras, but many of them hadn't worked properly in years. Lighting was inconsistent. Blind spots were common. People moved through it quickly, heads down, focused on leaving. A breakthrough came when a woman reported something unsettling. While walking to her car late one evening, she noticed a man standing between two vehicles, pretending to be on his phone. As she passed, he followed closely behind her. When she turned suddenly, he stopped. She ran back toward the elevator and called security. The man disappeared into the stairwell. Investigators reviewed footage and noticed the same man appeared in older recordings near the times other victims had vanished. He wore different clothes each time. Sometimes a reflective vest. Sometimes a jacket with a company logo. He looked like he belonged there. After weeks of surveillance, police identified him as a contract worker who performed overnight maintenance in multiple garages across the city. He had keys, access codes, a reason to be present at all hours. Co-workers described him as quiet and dependable. When his residence was searched, investigators found items belonging to multiple missing people. Keys, wallets, identification cards, carefully stored. He had kept notes about which garages had cameras that worked, which stairwells were rarely used, and which days were busiest. Another disturbing detail emerged when police reviewed years of ignored reports. People had complained about feeling watched, about someone standing too close in elevators, about footsteps behind them in empty garages. Each report had been dismissed as coincidence or anxiety. In a separate but eerily similar case uncovered during the investigation, police learned of a man who worked as a night janitor in office buildings. Employees had reported finding desks disturbed, chairs moved slightly, personal items missing and later returned. When he was arrested, he admitted to entering offices after hours and watching people through interior windows before eventually escalating his behavior. He had gone unnoticed for years because he was expected to be there. Another connected case involved a hotel where guests began reporting strange encounters. Someone knocking softly on doors late at night, claiming to be staff. A man in a uniform would ask to check a thermostat or smoke detector. Most guests refused. Some didn't. When a missing person case was tied back to the hotel, investigators realized the uniforms had been stolen and reused to gain access. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these cases is how ordinary the environments were. Parking garages, offices, hotels, places people pass through without thinking, places designed for convenience, not safety. One survivor later told investigators that what saved her was hesitation. She felt uncomfortable and slowed down instead of rushing to her car. That pause made the man lose interest. He relied on momentum, on people moving automatically, not paying attention. When the garage worker was finally arrested, investigators discovered he had committed crimes in multiple cities. Each time, he stayed just long enough to learn the environment, then moved on. He chose places where people were distracted, tired, and eager to leave. During interrogation, he admitted that he preferred transitional spaces. Not homes. Not crowded streets. Places in between. Places where people assumed they were still safe, but were already alone. True crime often reveals that danger doesn't always come from strangers in obvious places. Sometimes it waits in the spaces we don't linger in long enough to notice. The spaces we pass through every day. These stories are disturbing not just because of what happened, but because of how easily it all blended into routine. The perpetrators didn't break in. They didn't force entry. They were already allowed to be there. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, witness statements, and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let the world outside fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a stretch of highway that locals avoided after dark. Not because it was dangerous in an obvious way, but because it felt wrong. The road cut through long miles of forest and farmland, with few lights and even fewer buildings. People used it every day, but at night, it became quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The first person disappeared after their car broke down along that road. A passing driver reported seeing the vehicle pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights on. By morning, the car was still there, but the driver was gone. Police assumed they had accepted a ride and left the area voluntarily. Weeks later, another car was found abandoned only a few miles away. Then another. Each time, the scene was the same. No signs of a struggle. Doors closed. personal belongings still inside. The disappearances were spread out over months, and because the victims came from different towns, the cases weren't immediately connected. The pattern began to emerge when a tow truck operator mentioned something strange. He recalled seeing the same pickup truck parked nearby during 2 separate recoveries. The driver never approached. He just sat there with his headlights off, watching. Investigators began reviewing old traffic footage and found the pickup appearing again and again near the times vehicles were abandoned. It belonged to a man who lived less than 10 minutes from the highway. He worked as a roadside assistance contractor and frequently responded to breakdowns in that area. He had tools, a uniform, and a reason to stop. When questioned, he explained that he often pulled over to help stranded drivers. He said it was part of being a decent person. Many people remembered him. Some even described him as kind. A search of his property revealed something far more disturbing. Hidden behind a locked shed were personal items belonging to multiple missing people. Shoes, jackets, phones wrapped carefully in plastic. Each item was labeled with a date and a location. Investigators realized he didn't see the victims as people, but as moments in time. As police dug deeper, they uncovered reports that had been dismissed for years. Drivers who said a man had offered help but made them uncomfortable. People who noticed their cars were touched or moved when they returned from rest stops. Each report alone seemed minor. Together, they told a story of escalation. Another case tied into the investigation involved a woman who survived an encounter on that same highway. Her car overheated late at night. The pickup pulled over within minutes. The man offered to drive her to a gas station. Something in his tone made her hesitate. Instead, she pretended to call a friend and said help was already on the way. The man left immediately. She later learned how close she had come. In a separate but related discovery, police linked the suspect to a series of disappearances near rest areas across state lines. He traveled frequently for work. Each disappearance lined up with his schedule. He chose places where people were already vulnerable, already stressed, already eager to accept help. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from his interview with investigators. He said he never forced anyone. He waited for them to trust him. He relied on exhaustion, isolation, and the belief that help is always safe. Another connected case uncovered during the investigation involved a man who worked overnight at a train station. He assisted travelers, answered questions, and helped carry luggage. Several passengers reported missing bags or delayed arrivals, but nothing serious, until a missing person case traced back to the station. Surveillance footage showed the employee guiding the victim into a restricted area under the guise of helping them. In both cases, the common thread was access paired with authority. A uniform, a role, a reason to be trusted. These crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. They happened in moments of vulnerability, on roadsides, in transit spaces, in the brief pauses between destinations. One investigator later described the danger as quiet and patient. It didn't chase. It waited. It depended on routine and assumption, on the idea that bad things happen somewhere else. True crime reminds us that safety isn't just about where we are, but how aware we remain. That listening to discomfort can matter more than politeness. And that help should never come at the cost of instinct. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some names, locations, and minor details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a quiet suburban town, the kind of place where neighbors leave their doors unlocked and people wave to strangers without thinking. At first, it seemed like a perfect place to settle down. But beneath the surface, a quiet predator had been watching for years, unnoticed by everyone around him. The first victims were elderly residents living alone. They were considered private, independent, and safe. When one went missing, neighbors assumed they had gone to visit relatives or had been hospitalized. Weeks later, another elderly resident disappeared under similar circumstances. The pattern went unnoticed because the disappearances were far apart and involved people who lived solitary lives. It wasn't until a young woman reported a strange encounter that authorities began to connect the dots. She had been walking her dog at night when a man appeared from the shadows. He smiled, waving as if he belonged there. She felt a chill run down her spine and quickly walked home, locking the door behind her. The description she gave matched several reports that had been filed quietly over the years. Investigators discovered that the man had been living a double life. By day, he worked at a local hardware store and volunteered at community events. By night, he tracked residents' routines, noting who left for work, who went shopping, and who was home alone. He had detailed notebooks filled with observations, phone numbers, addresses, and even diagrams of homes and surrounding streets. When authorities searched his home, they found evidence of long-term planning. Items belonging to multiple victims were carefully stored. Personal identification, clothing, and photographs, each labeled with dates and locations. What made the case chilling was not just the crimes themselves, but the patience and precision with which they were carried out. He had no impulsive tendencies. He waited, observed, and struck only when the opportunity was safest for him. Another layer to the investigation revealed that he had installed hidden cameras and listening devices in homes he had entered. Some victims were monitored for weeks before any harm came to them. Investigators concluded that he enjoyed the control and fear itself, not simply the possession of belongings or other material things. A related case surfaced in a nearby town, where a college student reported being followed home after classes. She noticed the same car parked on multiple streets, the same figure appearing in alleys and near crosswalks. She reported it to campus security, and officers traced the vehicle back to the same man. It became clear that he didn't limit himself to one neighborhood. He moved quietly from place to place, choosing victims whose routines he could predict and who were least likely to raise alarm quickly. During his trial, the psychological evaluation revealed a chilling insight. He did not see his victims as people. He saw them as objects, as moving pieces in a game he controlled. What made him most dangerous was his ability to blend in, to appear normal, and to exploit the assumptions of trust that communities naturally extend to familiar faces. This case is a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it lives quietly next door, attending the same events, waving politely, waiting for moments of opportunity. True crime often teaches us to trust our instincts, to pay attention to subtle signs, and to understand that routine and familiarity can sometimes be exploited. Awareness, vigilance, and intuition are our strongest protections. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves come from documented investigations, court records, and witness statements. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let the tension of the day fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you find yourself coming back for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a town built around convenience. Everything people needed was close by: shops, schools, offices, and walking paths that connected neighborhoods like quiet arteries. People felt safe here. Familiar faces passed each other every day. That sense of familiarity was exactly what allowed something dark to exist unnoticed for so long. The first warning sign came in the form of a complaint that went nowhere. A woman reported that someone had been inside her house while she was away. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But she was certain something had changed. A chair was angled differently. A cupboard door was left slightly open. Police told her it was likely stress or forgetfulness. Weeks later, another resident reported something similar. Then another. Each time, officers found no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows were intact. No alarms were triggered. The reports were logged and quietly dismissed. Then someone went missing. The victim was a man in his early 40s who lived alone and worked predictable hours. He was last seen walking home from a grocery store less than a mile from his house. His groceries were later found in his kitchen, partially unpacked. The front door was locked. His phone and wallet were gone. There was no evidence of a struggle. Police initially believed he had left voluntarily, but friends insisted that didn't make sense. He had plans. He had responsibilities. He wouldn't just disappear. 2 months later, a woman living alone vanished under nearly identical circumstances. This time, investigators paid closer attention. Her home also showed subtle signs of disturbance. Nothing obvious, just small inconsistencies. A window unlatched. A light left on in a room she never used. As detectives dug deeper, they noticed that all reported incidents and disappearances occurred within a specific area connected by pedestrian paths and service alleys. These paths were rarely monitored and used mostly by locals who felt comfortable walking them at all hours. Attention turned to a man who worked as a delivery and maintenance contractor in the area. He was known by many residents, often seen carrying tools or packages. He had access codes, keys, and a reason to be present in and around homes. People trusted him because he looked like he belonged. When police searched his vehicle, they found notebooks filled with dates, addresses, and observations. Notes like alone, returns late, and no visitors. Some entries were marked complete. Others were circled. A search of a rented storage unit revealed personal belongings from multiple missing people. Shoes, bags, identification cards. Items that held no monetary value but deep personal significance. Everything was carefully organized. Investigators soon realized the reports of someone being inside homes without stealing anything were part of the same pattern. He had been entering houses just to observe, to learn routines, to test access points. Sometimes he stayed only minutes. Other times, hours. He moved silently, carefully, leaving as little evidence as possible. Another disturbing detail emerged when police reviewed years of overlooked security footage. In several cases, a figure could be seen walking behind residents on the paths late at night, always keeping distance, always slowing or stopping when they did. He followed patterns, not people, waiting for the moment when predictability made intervention easy. A separate case uncovered during the investigation involved a woman who had narrowly avoided becoming a victim. She returned home unexpectedly one afternoon and found her bathroom light on. She was certain she had turned it off. As she stood in the hallway, she heard a soft sound, like fabric brushing against a wall. She left immediately and called police. The intruder escaped through a back door. Her report helped investigators narrow their timeline. As more evidence came to light, authorities realized the crimes extended beyond the town. Similar disappearances had occurred in neighboring areas with the same pedestrian infrastructure, the same kind of access, the same sense of safety. During interrogation, the man admitted that he preferred places where people felt comfortable, where they moved without thinking. He said routines made everything easier. He didn't rush. He waited. He relied on people dismissing small signs because acknowledging them felt inconvenient or embarrassing. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case was how many people had interacted with him. He had been inside dozens of homes. He had been trusted, welcomed, thanked. His presence had never raised alarms because it matched expectations. In the aftermath, residents struggled with a new awareness. They questioned memories, sounds they had ignored, moments they had brushed aside. The town installed new lighting, new cameras, new locks. But what changed most was how people listened to their instincts. This story, like so many others in true crime, is not just about what happened, but about how it was allowed to happen. About how familiarity can become a blind spot. About how danger doesn't always force its way in, it often waits to be invited through assumption and routine. True crime reminds us that awareness is not fear. It's attention. It's listening to small discomforts before they become something larger. It's understanding that safety is not guaranteed by familiarity alone. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness testimony. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place designed for short stays. A roadside motel just off a major highway. The kind of place people stop at without thinking, travelers passing through, truck drivers resting for the night, families breaking up long drives. Rooms turned over quickly. Guests came and went, often without learning each other's names. For years, nothing unusual was reported. Then a woman failed to arrive at her destination. She had checked into the motel late at night and sent a message saying she was tired and would continue driving in the morning. That message was the last anyone heard from her. When police contacted the motel, staff said she had checked out early. There was no reason to question it. Months later, another guest vanished after staying at the same motel. Then another. Each case occurred weeks or months apart, in different seasons, involving people from different places. The disappearances were handled by different jurisdictions, and no one initially connected them. The first clue came from an employee who had worked at the motel for several years. He mentioned that a certain room was requested unusually often, even when other rooms were available. Guests staying in that room frequently checked out early or left belongings behind. Sometimes, staff would find personal items in the trash that didn't seem like things people would willingly discard. Investigators reviewed booking records and noticed a pattern. The same employee was often working the desk when those guests checked in. He was described by co-workers as quiet, reliable, and helpful. Guests trusted him because he handled everything calmly and efficiently. He knew which travelers were alone, which rooms were isolated, and which security cameras didn't work properly. When police reviewed old surveillance footage, they noticed something unsettling. On several nights tied to disappearances, the employee could be seen walking toward guest rooms long after his shift ended. Sometimes he carried linens. Sometimes nothing at all. The footage was grainy, incomplete, and often overwritten before it could be reviewed in detail. A search of the motel uncovered a hidden maintenance corridor behind several rooms. It allowed access without passing through public areas. Inside one of the storage spaces connected to the corridor, investigators found items belonging to missing guests. Phones, identification cards, clothing. Each item had been cleaned carefully. As the investigation widened, police discovered similar cases connected to other motels along the same highway. In each instance, the suspect had worked temporarily or filled in for short periods. He moved frequently, staying just long enough to learn routines and vulnerabilities before relocating. Because motels are designed for anonymity, his presence never stood out. Another disturbing detail emerged when detectives interviewed survivors. A man recalled waking briefly in the night to someone standing near the door, assuming it was staff responding to a noise complaint. A woman remembered being offered help carrying luggage to her room, then feeling uncomfortable when the employee lingered too long. At the time, neither thought it was worth reporting. The suspect's method relied on exhaustion and trust. Travelers were tired, disoriented, far from home. They didn't question authority in a uniform. They didn't want trouble. He counted on that hesitation. In one narrowly avoided case, a guest became suspicious after noticing the employee outside her room more than once. She locked the door and placed a chair against it. In the morning, she found scratch marks near the lock. Her report helped confirm the timeline investigators were building. When the suspect was finally arrested, authorities uncovered journals documenting years of movement. Highway exits, motel names, room numbers, notes about which properties had blind spots or minimal staffing overnight. He didn't view his actions as impulsive. He described them as planned, deliberate, and quiet. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is how invisible it all was. Motels are transitional spaces. People don't linger. Staff turnover is high. Guests rarely speak to one another. It was the perfect environment for something terrible to hide in plain sight. These crimes didn't occur in places people consider dangerous. They happened in ordinary rooms with locked doors and flickering lamps. Places meant to feel temporary and safe. The danger wasn't loud. It didn't rush. It waited patiently in routine and anonymity. True crime often shows us that safety is not guaranteed by familiarity or convenience. That trust, when combined with exhaustion and isolation, can be exploited.
And that listening to discomfort, even when it feels inconvenient, can matter. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.
Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and minor details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, witness accounts, and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a neighborhood that had once been lively but had grown quiet over the years. Houses were neat, lawns trimmed, and sidewalks mostly empty. The kind of place where people trusted their neighbors without question. But one family who had recently moved in noticed something strange almost immediately. At night, they would hear footsteps in the attic. Faint, almost deliberate, moving slowly across the boards above them. At first, they assumed it was animals, mice or raccoons. But the sounds persisted, and sometimes, small objects in the house seemed to shift ever so slightly when no one was there. One evening, the mother of the family was woken by a soft knocking coming from inside the walls. She pressed her ear against the plaster and could hear whispers, though she couldn't make out the words. Heart pounding, she woke her husband, and together they searched the house. They found nothing unusual. The next day, a neighbor mentioned that a man had moved into the house next door months earlier, a quiet man who was rarely seen but always polite. He had delivered packages and helped with small yard projects, blending perfectly into the neighborhood. Weeks later, police were called to a nearby town after a woman disappeared from her home. There were no signs of forced entry. No witnesses. No struggle. The only clue was a faint set of fingerprints on a windowsill, previously overlooked because they seemed ordinary. Investigators began to notice a pattern. Similar disappearances had occurred in suburban areas across multiple counties, each involving someone who lived alone and was last seen at home in the evening. The connection became clearer when a young man reported seeing the same quiet neighbor standing in a vacant lot late at night, holding what appeared to be blueprints. When officers checked his residence, they found meticulously organized files, schedules, maps of neighborhoods, notes on houses, routines of residents. Some pages had detailed sketches of floor plans, marking windows, doors, and likely hiding spots. The man had been planning for years, studying behaviors, learning who lived alone, who left at predictable times, and who was unlikely to have visitors. Inside a hidden room behind a false wall in his basement, investigators found evidence of multiple crimes. Belongings from victims, jewelry, clothing, photographs, personal items, each catalogued and labeled. Some victims had been monitored for weeks before any direct interaction occurred. He kept recordings and notes of their routines, documenting every movement, every habit, every predictable behavior. Another chilling case connected to this investigation involved a young college student who had reported being followed on campus. A man in casual clothing would appear at the library, in the cafeteria, sometimes observing from a distance. She mentioned it to campus security, who initially dismissed it as coincidence. Later, footage from surveillance cameras captured him moving across campus in patterns that aligned with missing persons cases, appearing where he wasn't supposed to be, always quiet, always unnoticed until the damage had been done. The psychological profile of the suspect revealed a disturbing pattern. He derived satisfaction from control, not just from the act of harming. He observed, waited, and exploited assumptions. He relied on the predictable behaviors of his victims and the inattentiveness of communities. He didn't need force. He relied on trust, routine, and the idea that people rarely question what seems ordinary. Further investigation uncovered additional victims across nearby towns, each case showing the same methodical approach. In one instance, a woman narrowly escaped because she noticed footprints in the garden, footprints that did not belong to her family. She called the police immediately, an instinct that may have saved her life. In another, a man noticed his neighbor's cat behaving strangely, following shadows or growling at empty spaces. That animal's behavior led to the discovery of hidden cameras in a nearby shed, equipment used to monitor multiple homes over time. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how ordinary the perpetrator appeared. He attended community events, helped neighbors with small tasks, and smiled politely at anyone who crossed his path. No one suspected him, because he looked normal, because he acted normal, because he blended in perfectly. The crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. They occurred in quiet homes, in neighborhoods people considered safe, in spaces where trust was assumed. The danger was patient, methodical, and calm, hidden behind polite manners and ordinary appearances. True crime reminds us that awareness is a quiet but powerful tool. That instincts, even when subtle, can be life-saving. That ordinary routines can be exploited by those who observe and wait. And that sometimes, danger is less about chaos and more about the quiet patience of someone who hides in plain sight. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and continuously. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but these events truly happened. These stories are not meant to shock, but to quietly reveal the darker sides of real life. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to step away now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how many places these stories reach. If you find yourself coming back for more true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps more than you know. This story begins with a missing person report that didn't seem urgent at first. A middle-aged man failed to show up for work. He lived alone, didn't have close family, and was known to take spontaneous trips. His employer waited 3 days before calling police. When officers entered his home, nothing appeared wrong. His wallet was gone. His car was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. The case was quietly filed as a voluntary disappearance. Weeks later, another person vanished. Then another. All lived alone. All had routine lives. All disappeared without signs of violence. The cases were handled separately, spread across neighboring towns, and no one connected them at first. The connection emerged by accident. A patrol officer noticed that each missing person had recently visited the same self-storage facility. At first, it seemed like coincidence. But when detectives pulled security footage, they noticed the same employee helping each of them. He was polite, helpful, and forgettable. He helped them choose unit sizes, explain payment plans, and walked them down narrow hallways lined with metal doors. When questioned, the employee cooperated fully. He answered calmly. He even joked with investigators. He said he saw hundreds of customers every month and barely remembered any of them. But investigators noticed something odd. His access logs showed he entered the facility late at night, often long after closing hours. A warrant was obtained to search the facility. Most units were filled with ordinary items, furniture, boxes, old clothes. But one unit stood out. It was paid for in cash. Always on time. No name on the account. Inside, police found plastic sheeting, restraints, and personal belongings linked to multiple missing people. The employee was arrested that same night. During interrogation, he revealed a routine that had gone unnoticed for years. He targeted people with no close family, no one likely to raise immediate alarm. He used his job to gain trust. Once inside the storage facility after hours, there were no witnesses. No cameras in certain corridors. No sounds that could escape the reinforced walls. What disturbed investigators most was not just the crimes, but how long it went undetected. Customers walked past the unit every day, unaware of what had happened inside. The building sat beside a busy road, surrounded by normal life. Another case takes us to a quiet retirement community. An elderly woman reported receiving phone calls late at night. No one spoke on the other end. Just breathing. Police advised her to block the number. Weeks later, she was found deceased in her home. At first, it appeared to be natural causes. But an autopsy revealed otherwise. Investigators traced the calls to a man who worked as a home maintenance contractor in the area. He had keys to dozens of homes. He knew schedules. He knew who lived alone. Over time, police uncovered a pattern of surveillance and psychological torment before his crimes. He didn't rush. He observed. He waited. Perhaps the most unsettling case comes from a college campus where students felt safe walking at night. A series of assaults occurred in dormitories with no signs of forced entry. Doors were locked. Windows intact. Panic spread as students realized someone had access. The perpetrator turned out to be a former campus employee who had kept a master key after being dismissed. For months, he moved freely through buildings after midnight. He blended into the environment so well that several victims recalled seeing him earlier that day and feeling no fear. In each of these cases, the common thread is access, trust, familiarity. The crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. They happened where people felt secure, where they assumed nothing bad could happen. True crime teaches us that danger often hides behind normal routines, ordinary jobs, familiar faces. And while these stories are disturbing, they are also reminders to stay aware, to trust discomfort, and to question what feels slightly off. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real true crime stories told calmly, quietly, and without distraction. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented cases. These stories are meant to be listened to slowly, quietly, and with care. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to stop here. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a house that no one wanted. It sat on the edge of a small town, empty for years, even as the housing market grew tighter. Each time someone moved in, they moved out within months. Neighbors said the house felt wrong. Doors would be found unlocked. Lights turned on by themselves. People heard footsteps on the stairs late at night, even when no one else was home. Eventually, a young couple purchased the house, dismissing the rumors as superstition. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Then small things began to happen. Items disappeared and reappeared in different rooms. The couple heard soft noises in the walls, like breathing or shuffling. They assumed it was animals. One night, the woman woke up and realized someone was standing at the foot of the bed. She couldn't see a face, only a shape. When she screamed, the figure fled. Police searched the house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. Days later, the man noticed something odd in the basement. A section of wall sounded hollow when tapped. Behind it, police discovered a narrow crawl space that led to a hidden room. Inside were blankets, food wrappers, bottles of water, and notebooks filled with observations. The writer had been living inside the house, unnoticed, for months. He documented the couple's schedules, conversations, and sleeping habits in disturbing detail. The intruder was arrested weeks later. He had been entering homes through crawl spaces and attic vents, living inside them without the occupants' knowledge. Investigators linked him to multiple cases across the state. Families had unknowingly shared their homes with a stranger, sometimes for years. Another case comes from a hospital where patients began reporting strange encounters late at night. People claimed a staff member checked on them, adjusted their fours, and spoke softly. The problem was that no such staff member was scheduled. Security footage later revealed a man wearing scrubs, moving confidently through restricted areas. He wasn't an employee. He had stolen a uniform and memorized routines. When arrested, authorities found he had targeted vulnerable patients, exploiting their weakened state. He blended in perfectly. No one questioned him because he looked like he belonged. In a different city, a string of disappearances puzzled investigators. All the victims had used the same rideshare service shortly before vanishing. Data eventually revealed a driver who had deactivated his GPS during certain trips. His car was found to contain personal belongings from multiple missing people. He had taken advantage of trust and convenience, turning something familiar into something dangerous. The final case in this story involves a man who volunteered at a community center. He taught classes, helped with events, and was known by name. Over time, he gained access to private spaces, storage rooms, and offices. When a fire broke out in the building, investigators discovered evidence of crimes hidden in areas only volunteers could reach. The man had used his position to commit acts that went unnoticed for years. What makes these cases disturbing isn't just what happened, but how close it all was. Inside homes. Inside hospitals. Inside places meant to be safe. The perpetrators didn't force their way in. They were already there. True crime shows us that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks helpful. Sometimes it looks ordinary. And sometimes it lives quietly in the background of daily life. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been altered to protect identities, but the events themselves are true and documented. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future stories. This story begins with a disappearance that no one noticed right away. A woman in her early 30s lived alone in a busy city. She worked from home, rarely socialized, and had no close family nearby. When she stopped responding to emails, her clients assumed she was taking time off. Days passed. Then weeks. When police finally entered her apartment, they found it clean and orderly. Her phone was gone. Her keys were missing. There were no signs of a struggle. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. The case quickly went cold, labeled as an adult who left voluntarily. Months later, another woman vanished under similar circumstances. Same age range. Same lifestyle. Same city. Again, no witnesses. No signs of violence. Investigators didn't connect the cases until a building manager mentioned something strange. Both women had recently requested maintenance work. The maintenance worker was cooperative when questioned. He had worked in dozens of buildings across the city. He had keys, access codes, and knowledge of residents' schedules. At first, nothing tied him directly to the disappearances. But detectives noticed that his work orders aligned perfectly with the days the women were last seen. A search of his storage unit revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing women. Jewelry, identification cards, phones, everything carefully organized and labeled. He had kept records of which buildings he worked in, which apartments belonged to people who lived alone, and which residents rarely had visitors. In another case, a quiet suburban street was shaken when a teenage boy went missing after a late-night walk. He was last seen heading toward a park he visited often. Weeks later, police discovered a hidden structure in a wooded area nearby. Inside were signs that someone had been living there for a long time. Maps of the neighborhood. Notes describing people's routines. The boy had been targeted simply because he was predictable. Another disturbing case comes from a long-term care facility where several residents died under mysterious circumstances. At first, it was assumed to be natural causes. But a nurse noticed inconsistencies in medication records. A deeper investigation revealed that a staff member had been administering incorrect dosages, carefully choosing patients who had no close relatives to question their deaths. He had worked there for years without suspicion. The final case in this story involves a man who posed as a delivery driver. He wore a uniform, carried packages, and knocked confidently on doors. Most people didn't think twice before opening them. Over time, reports of break-ins and assaults began to surface. Witnesses described a man who looked completely legitimate. It wasn't until security camera footage was analyzed that police realized the same man appeared in multiple locations, always wearing a different company logo. These stories are disturbing because they show how easily trust can be exploited. The people responsible didn't rely on force. They relied on access, on routine, on the assumption that familiar things are safe. True crime reminds us that danger often hides in plain sight, woven into everyday life. And while these stories are unsettling, awareness is one of the strongest forms of protection. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are true and documented. This story is meant to be listened to quietly and slowly. If disturbing material affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the room grow quiet. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you come back often for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a town that relied heavily on routine. People left for work at the same time each morning. Shops closed at predictable hours. Nothing ever seemed out of place. That's why it took so long for anyone to notice that something was wrong. The first disappearance was a young man who worked nights. He lived alone and was rarely seen during the day. When he failed to show up for his shift, co-workers assumed he'd overslept or quit without notice. His landlord waited nearly a month before calling police. Inside the apartment, everything was neat. No signs of struggle. No phone. No wallet. Investigators noted that the door had been locked from the outside. Over the next year, 4 more people vanished. All lived alone. All kept predictable routines. And all disappeared without witnesses. The cases were spread out enough that no immediate connection was made. Each was quietly labeled as a voluntary disappearance. The break came when a woman narrowly avoided becoming the next victim. She returned home early one evening and noticed something strange. Her door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off, but she sensed someone had been there. A drawer was slightly open. Her bedroom window, normally locked, was unlatched. She left immediately and called police. Investigators found no intruder, but they did find something unusual. The woman's spare key, which she kept hidden outside, was gone. When asked who might know about it, she mentioned a man who had done utility work in the building months earlier. He had chatted casually with her while working, asking about her schedule, her job, and whether she lived alone. That detail caught investigators' attention. The man worked as a contractor for various services in the area. He had access to dozens of apartment buildings and homes. He knew where spare keys were commonly hidden. He knew which doors stuck and which windows didn't lock properly. Most importantly, he knew routines. When police searched his vehicle, they found notebooks filled with addresses, names, and notes like alone, night shift, and no visitors. Some entries were crossed out. Those crossed out names belonged to missing people. A search of his rented garage revealed something far worse. Inside were personal items belonging to multiple victims, arranged carefully on shelves. Phones, wallets, keys, and photographs. Investigators realized he didn't take items for value. He took them as proof. In another disturbing case connected to this investigation, police uncovered a series of break-ins that had never been reported. Families had assumed doors left open or moved objects were accidents. But surveillance footage eventually revealed the same man entering homes while people slept. Sometimes he stayed only minutes. Sometimes hours. He never woke them. He just watched. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from his confession. He said he preferred people who wouldn't be missed quickly. People whose absence would blend into the noise of everyday life. He counted on delay. On assumptions. On silence. Another case linked to this story involves a woman who began noticing someone following her during her morning walks. Always at a distance. Always wearing different clothes. She changed her route, but the feeling persisted. One morning, she turned suddenly and saw him standing still, staring at her. She reported it. That report may have saved her life. His description matched the suspect already under investigation. The final revelation shocked even seasoned detectives. The man had lived an entirely normal life. He had friends. He attended community events. He was described as polite and reliable. No one suspected him. Not because he was clever, but because he was familiar. These crimes didn't happen in abandoned places or dark alleys. They happened in homes. In neighborhoods. In spaces people believed were safe. The danger wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet. Patient. Observant. True crime teaches us that awareness matters. That discomfort has meaning. And that routine, while comforting, can also be predictable. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.